Hi guys, I hope all is well. So in today's video series, we'll just be going over topic 1 to 5 for business enterprise law. So the first topic just looks at the background of the Companies Act, how it came into being, etc. So let's just get right into it. Another thing, guys, if you haven't subscribed, please make sure you click that subscribe button, send a heart on the comment sections, say thank you, please. And please, guys, please don't text me asking for my notes. I don't feel comfortable sharing my notes. As I'm teaching this content, as I'm tutoring it, please make your own notes so that you learn better. Okay, let's get right into today's content. So when we say business entities, we are referring to the structure of the business, not necessarily what the business does. So when someone says we want the types of entities that exist, we are not talking about what the business does, but we're talking about what makes the business, what are the characteristics of that business. For instance, partnerships, close cooperations, companies, private companies, public companies. So that's what someone means when they say a business entity, right? And you'll see that we focus quite a lot on the different types of entities that we have. Hence, it's important for you to understand that when someone says a business entity, they don't necessarily mean what the business does. They don't mean a manufacturer. They don't mean a retailer. They mean the characteristics that make that business, right? So all South African business entities are regulated by legislation and common law. Okay, not all of them, but basically the Companies Act regulates companies. The Close Cooperation Act regulates close corporations. We know partnerships are regulated by the law of contracts. Business trusts are also regulated kind of by a trust deed, right, which is a contract. So they are regulated by some common law or legislation, right? And our focus obviously on this course is the Companies Act, right? And there have been 3 Companies Acts so far in South Africa. The first one was in 1926. Then there was another one in 1973, and the one that we are using right now is the Companies Act of 2008, right? So what's important to note is that in 1973, that's when the Close Cooperation Act was introduced, right? So along with the Companies Act of 1973, the Close Cooperation Act was also introduced then, right? It allowed close corporations to come into being or to be converted into private companies, right? Yeah. Okay, so there were amendments to this Companies Act. So this is just background, guys, nothing much. So the Companies Act amendment of 1984. So just remember the dates, right? So that's the first amendment that we had in the Companies Act. It was in 1984, and close corporations could now convert into private companies. So if you were a close corporation at the time, you were actually allowed to move from the business entity of being a close corporation to now registering as a private company, right? And then we also had the Companies Amendment Act of 37 of 1999, which dealt with a company acquiring shares from existing shareholders, meaning from 1999 or whenever it became effective, companies were now able to buy back shares from their shareholders, meaning that before this, companies were not allowed to buy back the shares that they had issued out to shareholders, right? And then we have the Close Corporation Act of 69, and as I said, close corporations are regulated under the Close Corporation Act. Companies are regulated under the Companies Act of 2008. Trusts are regulated by the trust deed, right? And the Trust Property Protection Act, I think that's how it's called. And partnerships are regulated by the law of contracts, common law, right? So the Companies Act, the Close Corporation Act of 69, right, was introduced in 1973. So it wasn't just introduced, right, in 1999, but if you remember what I said here, in 1973, that's when close cooperations were introduced. However, their act came into being in 1999, and right, it was introduced in, that was the close corporation one. Sorry, they came into being in 1973, and then their act was now introduced in 1984. Guys, in 1973, sorry. They were introduced in 1973, and their act came into being in 1984, right? So this act was made to facilitate the incorporation of smaller businesses, right? So we'll talk a lot about close corporations, so don't stress about that, right? And they are juristic persons. Okay, and juristic persons cannot be members of partnership of close corporations. We'll talk about close corporations, don't stress about it. So what is a juristic person? What does someone mean when they say something is a juristic person? So when someone says a thing is a juristic person, they mean that thing can perform juristic acts. So mostly when we say juristic persons, we mean companies, not people, but things that can take actions on their own, separate from their members, separate from their owners, separate from their shareholders, right? So juristic acts are acts to which the law attaches consequences for a party to perform them. So when you perform a juristic act, right, then the law will attach a responsibility on you to carry out that, and someone can actually hold you accountable for it and go to the courts to try and make sure that you perform whatever juristic act you were supposed to perform. So they are enforceable acts, right? And South Africa's law was actually influenced by the UK, right? So now let's talk about how we arrived at the New Companies Act of 2008. So there was a policy paper, right? And this is a brief document in which results and research are presented to non-specialized audience. So he's saying there needs to be a policy paper where obviously experts are going to gather information about how are we going to amend, how we're going to improve the acts that we already have. And then they present this on a document called a policy paper. And this is normally for unspecialized audience. I mean, we are at a better stage, but people like in townships that know nothing about the law, right? They're going to be presented with a policy paper that tries to simplify exactly what they are trying to do with this New Companies Act, right? So this paper promised a law in which forming a company is simplified and costs are reduced. So this means that before the 2008 Act, it was very hard and complex to form a company. However, in order to improve that, the New Companies Act of 2008 now came into being, where we're saying we want it to be simplified and we want the cost of forming a company to be reduced, right? And the second thing that is important with this forming of the New Companies Act is the NEDLAC objectives, right? So this is an easy mark, make sure you remember it. So what are the NEDLAC objectives? And you'll see that when we get to like partnerships, when we get to companies like at the end, the Memorandum of Incorporation, you'll see that they bring the NEDLAC objectives quite a lot, right? So when we look at the MOI and why the MOI is there and what objective it tries to reach. So it's very important for you to understand that we have NEDLAC objectives, and they are that the Companies Act should be simplified, it should be flexible, and it should have corporate efficiency, it should show transparency, and there should be predictable regulations. So the NEDLAC Foundation wanted to come together and to ensure or to try and give objectives that they are trying to reach with this New Companies Act. And that is that it should be simplified, it should be flexible. You'll see that with the MOI, you can just make changes, right? Some changes need special resolutions, which we'll talk about. However, the MOI is very flexible. They define it as a document that is changed from time to time. Hence, it is simplified. And hence it is flexible. In terms of the MOI, again, you could think of how in order to just form a company, you need to bring a notice of incorporation to CIPC where you're informing them of your intention to register a company, and then you just submit an MOI, which seems to be simplified. So the MOI tries to meet these two objectives of simplifying and making it flexible to register a company, right? And then we also have corporate efficiency, transparency, and predictable regulation. So I've seen these two so far since I've been revising, right? And those are the ones that are mostly emphasized. But just know all of them so that you can answer those multiple choice questions, right? So for whose benefit does the company exist, right? So there are two approaches. So it could be for the benefit of shareholders, or we could also look at the pluralist approach. So what you guys should know is that with the traditional, also known as the classical one, we are saying that the company only exists for shareholders, meaning the only thing that matters is us bringing profits or giving dividends to the shareholders. We're not going to take care of the environment. We're not going to take care of other stakeholders. So with the first one, the traditional and classical one, we are saying that the company only exists for the benefit of the shareholder and no one else, right? And then we also have the enlightened shareholder view, right? So with the enlightened shareholder view, we're saying, okay, we will take care of the shareholders, and if there's some form of benefits that is left, we will also take care of the stakeholders, which is very different from the pluralist approach, because with the pluralist approach, we're saying you need to balance between shareholders and stakeholders. So with this enlightened one, we are saying shareholders should take take priority, and then whatever amount we have, whatever funds we have left, will now go to the stakeholders. With the pluralist approach, now we're saying you need to make sure you balance between the shareholders and the stakeholders. So no one should take priority. As you are taking care of your shareholders by giving them dividends, you should be taking care of the society. You should be making sure that the environment is in a good place, right? The environment is fine, right? Yeah. So I talked about this. This is the classical and traditional one, and then this one is the pluralist approach, where we say you need to balance between the two. Now, what is the purpose of the New Companies Act? It is to make sure that we promote development, transparency, and accountability, right? So we are talking about companies, right? And the most important document, okay, one of the most important documents in the Companies Act or in forming a company is the Memorandum of Incorporation, and we're going to cover this quite in depth when we get to organs of companies in topic 5. However, the MOI is basically a founding document, right, and it replaced the Memorandum and Articles of Association by the 1973 Act. So we're saying in the Act, in the Companies Act of 2008, you will call the founding document of a company an MOI. In 1973, the MOI was called a Memorandum and Articles of Association, right? So when you see Memorandum and Articles of Association, just know that relates to the old Act, the 1973 Act, when closed corporations were introduced, right? And then now, with the new Act of 2008, the Memorandum and Articles of Association is now called a Memorandum of Incorporation. And what this document does is that it sets the responsibilities, the roles of your stakeholders, of your directors, of your board of directors. It says their roles, responsibilities. It addresses certain issues. It addresses your audit committee. It addresses your number of shares that are authorized in an entity. But we'll look at this quite in depth. So this is just an introduction of topic of Companies Act, which is under topic 1. Next up, we're going to do topic 2. So please make sure you stay tuned. Bye guys. If you haven't subscribed, please make sure you click the subscribe button. Bye guys.